Have you ever seen that happen? Someone calls for justice, only to be turned into the bad guy, the aggressor. Well, today we're going to break down a really fascinating argument that looks at exactly how that rhetorical flip gets made, how a demand for basic accountability can get twisted into an accusation of barbarism. So the author kicks things off with this, this quote from a live television appearance. And for them, the real shock isn't just the words themselves, it's the silence that followed, the relative lack of a global outcry. They present this as Exhibit A, a clear symptom of a much bigger problem, cruelty becoming just normal. And that right there brings us to the core thesis of this whole piece. The author is arguing that we're seeing a really dangerous switcheroo. Cruelty is becoming business as usual, while having a conscience, actually speaking out against it, is being treated like it's a crime. All right, so here's our game plan for digging into this. We're going to follow the author's logic through 6 key steps. We'll start with the main contradiction they see, then we'll pick apart the flawed logic and the psychology behind it all. After that, we'll zoom out and look at why societies actually need dissent, touch on an ethical perspective from faith, and wrap it all up with the author's really powerful final question. Okay, so let's jump into that core contradiction. The author points out this really weird inversion happening. You've got people who are just using the legal system, they're not being violent, they're filing lawsuits, they're calling for investigations, and for that, they're being branded as invaders or barbarians. It's a complete flip. So that begs the question, right? How in the world is an argument like that even built? How do you turn a call for justice into an act of aggression? Well, the author suggests that to really get it, we have to start by looking at the logical foundation, or maybe the lack of one. And that brings us right here. According to the author, the rhetoric that paints justice seekers as invaders is just riddled with logical fallacies. It's an argument that, when you put it under a microscope, just doesn't hold up. Now, the author doesn't just say the logic is flawed. They get very specific. First, they point to ad hominem attacks. That's when you go after the person's background instead of their actual idea. Then there's false equivalence. This is a clever trick where criticizing the state gets twisted into an act of betrayal. And finally, pure hypocrisy, demanding total loyalty from others while refusing to look at your own history. And to really hammer that point on hypocrisy home, the author throws out this really sharp question. It's a direct challenge to that whole "you're not one of us" narrative. It basically asks if anyone could honestly say their own family tree is completely free of anyone who ever criticized the government. Okay, so if the logic is as shaky as the author claims, then what's really driving all this? What's the motivation? This is the perfect pivot point, moving us from how the argument is made to why it's being made. It's time to talk psychology. So in this section, we move from pure logic into the realm of psychology. The argument here is that these accusations aren't just bad reasoning. They serve a very specific psychological purpose: to deflect from the real issues and to whip up a moral panic around a particular group of people. The author highlights a few key tools in this psychological toolbox. First, creating a moral panic, which is basically turning your critics into a boogeyman to distract everyone. Second, there's projection, which we'll dig into in just a second. And third, good old in-group bias, that classic us versus them thinking, where our side is automatically the good side, no questions asked. Let's really focus on this idea of projection because it's a huge piece of the puzzle. The author defines it as the act of accusing other people of being disloyal at the exact same moment you yourself are defending a system that's causing harm. It's the ultimate blame shift. You're pointing the finger at them for betraying the country's ideals, when in reality, they're often the ones trying to make the country live up to them. All right, so moving beyond the individual mind, the author then zooms out to look at society as a whole. The argument here becomes a defense of dissent itself. The point is that dissent isn't some kind of disease to be cured. It's a vital, necessary ingredient for any healthy, functioning society. So here's the bottom line on this. From the author's viewpoint, societies don't get better because everyone agrees and stays quiet. They evolve because people are brave enough to stand up and critique them. And the great irony, according to the author, is that demanding silence in the name of loyalty is actually a betrayal of the one thing that allows for any kind of progress. And the author says you don't have to look far to see this in action. It's baked into history. They make the case that the U.S. itself was built on a foundation of dissent. Think about it. The abolitionists, the suffragettes, the civil rights leaders, these weren't the conformists. They were the critics, the ones who challenged the status quo.
and by doing that, they force the nation to get closer to its own ideals. Now, for the final layer of this analysis, the author brings in a perspective from faith and ethics. The argument here is that the call to speak truth isn't just political or social. For many people, it's a deep moral, even sacred obligation.
And the author makes a really powerful connection here. Across so many different traditions, telling the truth isn't just a good idea, it's a sacred duty. And what's more, the very figures we revere today as prophets, well, back in their own time, they were often seen as dangerous outsiders, as threats, as traitors. They paid a heavy price for their conscience.
To make this idea more concrete, the author references this specific verse from the Quran. The key takeaway they highlight is just how universal it is. It talks about honoring the children of Adam, and the author's interpretation of that is clear. It's a call to recognize the dignity in all human beings, not just the ones in your particular tribe or your group.
So, after peeling back all these layers, the logical, the psychological, the sociological, and the ethical, it all builds to a final, decisive choice. The author uses this entire deconstruction to frame one fundamental question about what a society is really trying to achieve. And here is that choice, laid out as clearly as possible. On one side, you have actual peace, which the author argues can only exist when it's built on justice. Now, that path requires accountability. It's hard work, but it's meant to clear the path for everyone. On the other side, you just have quiet, which you get through obedience and conformity. It's a path that really only protects the way things already are.
And this is the final thought the author leaves us with. It's a question that really reframes the entire debate, doesn't it? It asks us to think about whether our goal is a genuine, lasting peace that's built on a foundation of justice, or if we're just after the absence of inconvenient noise. Are we trying to solve the problem, or are we just trying to silence the people who are pointing it out? A powerful question to reflect on.